Welcome to the South Burlington School Board meeting. And I will start with comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda. All right, seeing none, we will move on to amendments. And I think we might have at least one. We needed to add a brief executive session at the end of the meeting.
And we don't have the enrollment update either today.
Okay, executive session to discuss labor negotiations, and it sounds like the enrollment update under the superintendent's report is not available yet. And Joanne is sitting in for David as he is out today. Any other amendments? All right, seeing none, we will move to announcements. Cole.
So at the high school, the annual ski and snowboard swap will be September 27th through the 29th. At Tuttle, their open house will be tomorrow at 6:15 p.m. District-wide, all schools have a TLC day Friday, September 20th, and only the middle school and the high school have one on Friday, September 27th. And then for the junior class school board representative, I sent, we have 2 applications, and I have sent them both to Elizabeth for interviews.
And I think, did we have agreement that Bridget and Brian were going to interview? I don't know if we did.
Happy to.
I'm happy to. I didn't know that we had agreed yet.
I thought we had some discussion.
I'm happy to do that.
Well, why don't we, I do have those 2 applications, so why don't I circulate those and we'll work on getting interviews set up then.
Great.
Great, appreciate your leadership on that, Cole. Thank
Sure.
you. All right, any other announcements? Nothing? All right, seeing none, we'll move on to city-school collaboration. And I don't know if we have a meeting set up with the city leadership next Friday, I believe. And beyond that, any other updates? I've been watching the Market Street updates relative to school access at Markup. Anything else? And I think there was a meeting last night on the City Rec Center, but I don't know if anybody was in attendance.
I could not go last night. No, it was, there was a meeting from 7 to 8:30. That was sort of a report out from their consultant on the survey that was done with regard to the rec center.
So we'll make that a follow-up of the
Yeah.
city meeting then?
Yeah.
Good. Anything else? All right, we'll move to the superintendent's report.
And I think Gary's looks like he's working on something, but you were gonna speak to these first 2 items, so. Sorry.
We'll deal with the technical difficulty. That's
Okay.
okay. All right.
And in regards to the enrollment update, we're just trying to get those numbers accurate. There was some errors in that, so we really want to make sure before we bring them to the board that they're very accurate.
So I saw a draft of that last week, and it looks like we had at least 10 years of historical data.
The data looks really good. We just want to make sure that every piece of it is correct
Okay.
before it comes
And
here.
my understanding is it'll be by school, by grade level, and include tuition students as well.
Yep, tuition students.
Okay.
Yep.
One question I have sort of over, I don't know, maybe Gary's ready, but is I've seen in a couple of places, just in newspaper reporting, and then on I think it's on the state website, this new dashboard that they have, Chamberlain keeps being reported as having 500 students.
yeah.
I think that's the pre-K. The pre-K students were mixed in with the K-5 students.
But I thought we only had 250 or so K through 5. Do we really have 250? Pre-K?
Students, yeah.
Certainly not.
District-wide.
District-wide.
Yeah, that would be
So
district.
all of the districts pre-K was put on
Pre-K,
Chamberlain's.
but not only in our buildings, but also with our partners. Remember, we have, for pre-K, you can have service in a partner that we partner with. So we have 200, about close to 300 students now registered.
I think the
3 or 4-year-olds.
number that's been reported in, actually some specific documentation relative to the airport is included all
Yeah.
pre-K.
Yeah, and I don't know what we need to do to sort of fix that in different places, because it's skewing things like student-teacher ratios and those kinds of things, because it's just not an accurate depiction of what the K
Okay.
through 5 looks like there.
Joanne, question for you?
So it's on the state website
I
as
think it
well.
was on the state website that way, the dashboard. There are there are many errors in the dashboard there that need to be fixed, but that was the most glaring one that's been reported in a couple of different places.
Yeah, okay, I'll look into that.
Yeah, there was some newspaper article, for example, I can't remember if it was Digger or 7 Days, or some place where they just sort of off the cuff said Chamberlain has 500 students. And they
Well,
said,
it's reported in the letter that Mr. Lee sent to the DOD. It's reported in there. I saw that.
Check to see if the microphones are on.
Test.
Here. Oh, you maybe move them closer.
Is that, can you hear us now?
Oh, after.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Just a little bit of mumbling sometimes.
Okay. All right, we'll
Okay.
talk more directly. And of course, it says do not touch, and I just touched it. Sorry.
Quick question on that. Isn't it the case that the pre-K includes more than what you would consider one grade? Like a kindergarten would be kids 5, but pre-K can be kids 3 or 4.
3 or 4, yeah.
So you might see a lot more than what you would expect in a 200 cohort grade size in the higher grades.
It's two
I think.
ages combined,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
That's correct.
since we don't have the final enrollment report yet, it would be helpful if there could be at least some comparison to the demographers' assessments, so we have a little bit of kind of accuracy testing from the demographers' projections versus what our actuals have been. That'd be helpful going forward.
Okay.
Okay, Gary.
Yeah, sorry, so Rick Marcotte.
Oh, I've been asked to, I don't know if the mics are working, but I've been asked to have people go to the mic because it's not recording on,
on RTN, when
RTN,
people
so-
from the
Okay,
community speak, yeah.
or you can sit if you want. I just,
that's okay.
all right, sorry.
So we're good for Rick Marcotte, 180 Market Street. The curbing date that was scheduled for this week has been pushed back until next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Those will be the major disruption days over the next several weeks. That will be the only major disruption period over the next several weeks. So that is rescheduled from this week to next Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. I believe that Brent Kuhn sent out correspondence to Rick Marcotte families to let them know that that was the case. Chamberlain, noise mitigation, airport, F-35, all of that stuff. So I just received an update from the Jones Payne Consulting Group, which is a FAA consultant. They acknowledge receipt of LN's existing conditions and recommendations for positive ventilation for the Chamberlain School. And they didn't tell me what questions they had, but they sent some clarifying questions back to LN, the mechanical engineering firm that did the assessment. And they committed to having the report to us as soon as possible after they received the answers to their questions. So that's pretty much where we are. The TAC is tomorrow night that we'll be discussing the overall noise mitigation report, the updated noise maps, and we will have representation there at the TAC meeting.
My
And-
understanding is that they're arriving tomorrow, aren't they?
What's that?
The first F-35s are supposed to arrive tomorrow, is my understanding from the news,
They're
yeah.
supposed to fly in tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the report is an LNN report or
It's a-
Jones
The
Payne?
company is called LN.
LN, okay.
LN Consulting Engineers. And they studied the existing conditions at Chamberlain.
Mhm.
And they studied the best positive ventilation system
Mhm.
to mitigate noise.
Okay,
And they sent that report to the FAA's consultant, who manages the process for the FAA through evaluation and then the grant writing and the-
so I guess I'm trying to be clear on expectations. Are we going to get a report back or are we going to get a grant?
Well, the first thing they committed to do is share the report that they're gonna share with the FAA.
Okay, so that's from LN to the FAA.
Well, LN to the FAA's consultant.
Jones Payne, okay, all right.
Jones Payne has agreed to share it with us when they furnish it to the FAA.
Mhm.
That will be the basis of the BTV grant
Mhm.
application process for noise mitigation at Chamberlain.
Okay, so then So it's not been formally applied for at this point?
No.
So that informs the application, and then we don't know the waiting period on the grant, okay. Okay,
So I have another follow-up question.
yeah.
What is the latest as far as just contingency planning for Chamberlain? I mean, if you can give a quick update. I know we've talked about it in the past,
So
but
it's really simple. What we plan to do is provide portable cooling if during the shoulder seasons, May, June of this coming school year, if the noise is at a level that forces us to keep the windows closed in the school all day for any hot periods that we have by the end of the school year, we will either lease or purchase portable ventilation units, air conditioning units, to keep the building cool and allow us to keep the windows closed to mitigate the noise.
and is there a plan also for doing further studies once a number of F-35s are here?
There are.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Could you just give an update for that? It just seems an appropriate time to kind of bring the community up to
update,
speed.
I don't have any details of what the FAA and LN will do. We don't have a schedule for the post F-35 arrival, but Superintendent Young has already talked about working with ATC again if we don't have timely feedback from the FAA.
And ATCs who did our
They did-
sound
they did-
testing before.
They did the sound testing
Okay.
originally.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, we'll move on, unless there are any questions on that, we'll move on to agenda item 8, master planning and visioning.
Yeah, it's really more of an update than a discussion of the organization process. I think we need to have a sort of deeper discussion, and David really needs to be here. No offense to it, but David kind of needs to be here to talk about resourcing that and how that all will work, because that's really about people and who's going to be, running that process. And it can wait a little bit. So basically, the update is that we have our, this week, Monday and Tuesday, the architects were at the high school, morning till evening, listening to different groups of faculty, different administrators, different staff, different
students
departments.
too, right?
And students.
Yeah.
And I was about to say, almost every department brought at least one student, and sometimes 2 or 3 with them to sort of give their perspective on that department's needs. And they were reviewing the very sort of rough plans that that Dora and Whittier have put together and really critiquing them, and it was a really sort of interactive couple of days, and they are going back and sort of altering the plans to match what they heard. It was a lot of really good feedback. Then next Monday and Tuesday, we have the middle school, so the same process at the middle school. So it will be each of the departments at the middle school coming through to look at sort of rough sketches that Dora and Whittier has done and critique them. Next Wednesday night, September 25th, we have our first community input night. So Dora and Whittier will sort of share where they are in that drafting process and look for feedback and questions from the community. There will be another set of meetings at the high school and the middle school in October, as well as another community input night in October. All of that will lead to a more refined design that will go to the cost estimators around Thanksgiving time. And then we should expect to see a more refined cost number in mid-December.
So are there 2 more community dates coming up?
So I'm saying September
Let me
25th
get those dates again.
and October 15th are the nights that are devoted specifically to master plan visioning. They'll both be at 7 p.m. They will both be at the high school library. This library was already in use, and we couldn't kick out the people who were using it. So they'll be at the high school library for those 2 meetings. And then, of course, people are welcome to ask questions and provide feedback via email, by coming to these meetings as well. And, yeah, so the process
And
is
do you
kind of
know if
moving
we're
along.
posting ads in the other paper for those?
Yes, there will be an ad in the other paper this Thursday for listing all the upcoming dates. And then Delina's already asked the other paper to run it again, taking off the first one after it goes by, with the remaining dates for school board meetings over the next few weeks and the next community input night. So that's in the other paper. It went into Front Porch Forum. It got sent to Front Porch Forum today. I don't know if it made it into today's issue of Front Porch Forum or not. And then we've asked the principals of the schools to send out email or to include it in their newsletters, because they usually all send a weekly newsletter. So yeah, we're working to kind of get the word out for people to come.
And then we've gotten a few emails as well, and I
Yep.
don't know, I know we're trying to coordinate responses, but I haven't seen responses back yet.
There have been, and you've been copied on them, at least BCC'd. So I'm not sure why you're not getting them, but yeah, there have been responses to those
Maybe I'll
emails.
circle back on that, because for
Yeah.
some reason I didn't see some, so, okay.
Yeah.
Right. Other board questions?
Oh, Brian, do you have other comments? I'm sorry, I kind of.
No, that was a wonderful job. I agree.
Okay.
Comments from the public? All right, seeing none, we will move on to transportation agreement with Winooski School District, and this is warned for action. Did- Were you going to review this, or Gary?
I
Or
think Gary was,
So this is this is essentially the same agreement that we've had for the last 2 years. The cost, the assessed cost to Winooski is the same. The change for this year, or the dates are December 2nd, which is the same, the first school day after Thanksgiving. But we've, at Winooski's request, extended it to April 10th, 2020 for the term of the agreement. Other than that, it's exactly the same agreement as the past 2 years.
And do we have, you may not have the answer to this, but do we have any information on sort of their improved attendance rates? Because this was the inception of this.
I didn't ask for it this year. I provided those attendance figures to you last year at this time when we did the second year of the contract. But I didn't request that from the superintendent at Winooski this year.
That might be helpful maybe at the end of this period to sort of, I think the benefit we all see in collaborating on this project is really improving students' attendance largely during the winter months where it's tough walking. So it'd be nice to have that validation that has improved for Winooski.
One question I had, Gary, was how we're doing in terms of staffing and how that impacts this contract, or how the contract impacts staffing, because I've sort of noted that we've had some challenges with having enough drivers and everything to meet our needs this year, and I just didn't know how that would impact this.
We have 2 drivers who are dedicated to do this. It doesn't impact our runs at all.
Okay.
And we did the analysis. I did it with the transportation director before we approved it. And we looked at it for a second time when they asked to extend the period into April, because I was concerned about co-curricular for the spring season, but there was no impact based on their schedule.
But what happens if one of those drivers gets sick, like one of the 2 that are sort of dedicated to this contract? What happens then?
So and we have sub-drivers
Yeah.
on right now. We're actually, as of one pending hire, we're going to be full in transportation.
Oh, good.
So first time since I've been here.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, any other questions? So do I have a motion to accept the transportation joint agreement with Winooski School District as proposed?
So moved?
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, and the motion passes. All right, we'll move on to negotiations update. We do have a mediations meeting scheduled for Tuesday, and we are in receipt of some communication from the association, and we are planning to commence, I believe, at 3 p.m.
3 p.m.
3 p.m.
on Tuesday.
on Tuesday.
Yep.
Anything else? All right, school board yearly agenda. I think that's in front of everybody. Again, I hate to say this, but when David's not here, we're just fooling along. Don't tell him I said that.
Well, some of the changes that, I don't know, has he talked about this agenda with you guys at all yet, or?
There were changes that he was making on this, so
Right.
maybe you want to walk us
Yeah.
through those.
So one of the things that he did was moved some of the reports around. So he's looking at the calendar as in the beginning of the year, like till March is sort of planning for the budget, making sure we have time for the budget. So I think, and I don't have the old one in front of me, but I think he looked like the financial conditions and activities and the financial planning was moved to October. Was that later in the year before? Gary, I'm just asking with you.
No, it was in September.
It was it? Okay. And then one of the other changes we made is we eliminated the separate ends report and are going to have one global ends report at the end of the year in May. So that's one of the other changes that he made in this. So we're looking at trying to have the reports be more consolidated and more helpful for planning for budget, and then also from like April to June to really be planning ahead for the next year, to have the summertime to be planning for what we might do differently. Those are the changes that he has made. Questions or?
Are we at the point where it's sufficient to have one year-end global ends monitoring? I know that, I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with waiting until May to hear that.
Well, it looks like there's SBAC assessment in December,
Right.
which is part of ends monitoring, but you're right, I don't see any other significant ends monitoring on there.
That's the one thing that troubles, well, one of the things. I had a question on another item, but
So can you clarify, Martin, what would you be looking for throughout the year? Because obviously, we've got the four district ends.
I'd like to see again how we are measuring and monitoring the ends, because we haven't seen that in a long time. I don't think we saw that this past spring. We didn't, unless I was not here for a meeting that we did, but I don't recall that we have seen ends monitoring quite some time, it seems to me.
I think there was an ends report. There was an ends
Was there?
report last year. There were separate reports that came out over the several months, and what we're proposing is to have them be in one monitoring report that has all the information around all the ends, so it's all consolidated into one report.
And the separate ones before were separated by like academic proficiency, personal development.
Yeah, there were separate things. Some of them were, one of them was the survey that we do around, the survey of high school students around drug and alcohol use. So that was one report. Some of them was academic. There were separate reports that somehow that got set up, and based on how the monitoring should be done is just one global ends around all of those different ends, and we want to have all the data together in that one report.
I think the struggle, I'm sorry, Elizabeth.
Well, I was just going to say, I think the challenge, I don't want to speak for anybody else on the board, but the challenge we have is, I don't think we fully understand as a board what metrics are being utilized to assess the ends. So I think the concern, if I can paraphrase Martin, is if we do this once in May, we're going to see a collection of sort of separate results of different measurement tools, none of which have been presented as a package of these will be the tools by which ends metrics will be monitored. So it's that interim step of a proposal and an agreement that this is what will be seen in that annual assessment.
Okay.
Right, I think
Precisely.
in future years, yeah, I could see us having one global ends monitoring, at some point during the year, but I'm still not quite clear what that will look like or what I can anticipate at that stage. Yeah.
So what you're asking for is you want to know what the metrics will be in that report, or you're asking for separate reports?
No, I would, what Elizabeth said and what you're saying, yeah, I would like to understand what the metrics are going to
Okay.
be, and an full explanation of the metrics before we see them. And I'd like to see it early enough so that we can give some input on whether we think that
Feedback,
that's
yeah.
sufficient.
Okay.
So if we backed up into that, I mean, we'd be talking about, without running into the budgeting process just becomes that.
January.
I would
Later.
say, yeah, probably the January timeframe to have a metrics review. And I guess, just to be clear, I don't see this as a laundry list of those assessment tools that you might currently be envisioning here. It's more, what is administration recommending as being the metrics to assess global ends?
What will be in the global ends report? What metrics will we have for that? That's what you're asking for.
Well, it's more, I guess I'm trying to clarify, if you have in your head several things right now, like if you have 10 surveys and reports and standardized assessments that you already know might be in here, there's not been a discussion with the board yet that that's the recommendation.
Like whether that
what
ties,
would
so
be the assessment.
we're gonna
Yeah.
use these 3 metrics to assess personal development. We've never sort of had the conversation of what those 3 different surveys or whatever tools they are, and whether that is sufficient for the board to understand whether personal development ends are being met.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So
And the earlier in the year we can see that, really, the better, so that there's time for feedback and change, or, some sort of, because I'm just worried that we lose basically a year. I think that was Martin's concern too. We lose another year on ends metrics if we get to May and say, oh, this doesn't really explain to us whether
Right.
personal ends metrics or citizenship or whatever it is are being met, and then we have to go back to the drawing board, and then, it's another year before we really kind of understand where we are.
Okay.
I think there's a general understanding that there's a lot of information and data that exists within the district. I think one of the challenges with ends metrics is sort of getting a recommendation from administration. What are the 2 or 3, but for each proficiency, for instance, academic, personal development, citizenship, and so forth, that would be the best proxy right now of continuous improvement, or that we're meeting the ends. And there's probably a lot more out there, but certainly within the academic proficiency, there's, those are probably the most well-defined metrics.
And I do think with the way each of the administrators in the district has set up their continuous improvement plans that we have to do for the agency, there's a lot of metrics that are in there. We've been talking a lot about what those metrics are, and having them be a way to, show student progress over time, and also show globally how the district's doing. I think they all match with the end. So we have somewhat of a plan to do it, but I understand what you're asking for. So in January, I don't know if we had to put this on the calendar, because it looks like we're supposed to have action on this today, that we would present or discuss metrics for the ends monitoring in January, and then if we put that in there, would the calendar be approved, or are there other questions around this? Or is that something you want me to bring back to David?
Well, I had a couple other questions, but
Okay.
I think we should go ahead and put that in here.
Okay.
And hopefully we can approve and not have this back again,
Yeah.
because we've been seeing it a lot. But when I look at the future agenda items, I want to confirm that the items that have in a parenthetical that they're associated with one of the reports, that in fact that future agenda item will be covered. For instance, the non-union support staff employee manual, will that be covered in 2.2, treatment of staff, which is in April 2nd meeting?
Yes.
And then the youth risk behavior survey being covered in 2.1 in June. I just want to make sure that that in fact is going to occur, because if that is, then we can strike those 2 from the future agenda items and have made some progress there. The other question I have about the future agenda items is whether any of these others should be put in other business and admin reports.
Well, I also wonder whether they also might go with some of your other reports, like the federal and state education policies may match up with executive limitations, because the federal those kind of policies are going to be part of what limits the work that David has to do. So that's going to be that's in November. So
That
that
would
could
be under the global executive constraint.
Yeah, and then how to run an effective public hearing.
That's more of a board development issue.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it's not about students, okay?
Yeah, it's not about students.
Okay. The city, school, long-term investment strategies could be with the financial planning and budgeting, 24, 25, 27. And the integrated field review report is really part of the global ends. That information is really part of global ends too. So that IFR report really looks at how we are doing as a district in terms of meeting the requirements of what the agency is asking us to do. It also matches up with our ends too. So we were looking at that report as being part of the global ends as well.
Oh, so we'll hear all about that in January.
Yeah.
All right. So in other words, probably we don't need to add any of these to the other business and admin reports.
I don't think so, no. I'm really trying to make them be part of the reports that come to you, so it makes the most efficient and most sense for you to see how the district's moving forward on the ends.
Okay.
So is it the board's pleasure to take action with that modification in January?
I'll move that we approve the board agenda and work plan 2019 to 2020 with the modification to the January meeting.
Second that?
Any further discussion? All in favor?
I,
All right, that's approved. So next on the agenda is school board self-assessment, and David included a couple of assessment tools in the package. If you recall, the board had received a number of different options for self-assessment in the past, and he ended up picking these out as maybe his recommendation for what we might want to consider utilizing. So one is an individual board member assessment, self-assessment, and the other is a guide for the board as a whole. And he and I did have a brief discussion prior to the meeting. I don't know if people have questions on these assessment tools versus any others, or what your general thoughts are on that process as recommended for self-assessment.
Well, and what then happens with this information? We put together a report for others, we look at it ourselves, what does this then do?
Well, in the past, it's been, we would dedicate a meeting or part of a meeting for discussion. So for instance, it might be the individuals would fill out the self-assessment. Those might be sent in ahead of time and the results collated. So if there was certain areas where there was common needs among the board for improvement as an individual board member, whether it's training or something else, that could be discussed in a blinded way in a meeting. And then the assessment guide, we could come into a meeting with the assessment guide for the board as a whole and make that a discussion point. The challenge we've had in the past, Brian, on self-assessment is sometimes we're critiquing the meeting itself, and sometimes we're critiquing the work. And the general feelings the board has had in the past is a more effective discussion, particularly in public with community presence, would be take a specific project or event or something of significance that the board's been engaged in, and really utilize that to do the self-assessment. So it might not be sort of the past year performance under this assessment, but it might be master planning and visioning to date. It might be budget development assessment, or it might be calendar management. It might be community engagement. So it might be in one of the primary areas of board responsibility, and then there's a little more meat to it, and that could inform the discussion. But Bridget and Martin and others, you've been engaged a little bit longer. What are your thoughts?
So I know that at one point we tried also to have something short at the end of one of the second meeting every month, and we tried to encourage people who attended the board meeting to give us some input and critique, and that didn't work.
No.
Because everybody was really mean to us and said terrible things. No, actually, it was the opposite. So it was not constructive necessarily. So, yeah, I have to ponder this. I looked through this earlier today, and I kind of like the other idea that we've talked about before, is take one particular area that we've worked on and critique that, and figure out how to improve it. You know.
Should there be a rubric associated there like that? assessment guide, but have some parameters that are,
I think it would be more helpful. I know we're supposed to be all for rubrics, we're having all our students be subject to rubrics, that's true, but usually it's somebody else that's grading you. I mean, I'd like to figure out like where we can improve. I mean, you know, take a particular issue and rather than say all the lovely things we've done, where could we have done this better or make this better?
Well, then maybe if you do the first one open-ended, then the rubric comes out of that because you're finding things falling into buckets of internal communication, external communication, different kinds of parts of the process.
I think we should have Noah do it for us because he's here and he's used to rubrics and he's here at most meetings and, yeah, and can grade us, you know, as long as we have. Man, okay, all right. That's true, thank you for reminding me of that, that's true. So you think do this in advance of another meeting and then something will come out of it, or?
No, just the opposite, that maybe
oh.
we should go open-ended as you're suggesting,
Oh,
but
I
out of
see,
that
I see,
process,
I
perhaps
see.
we end
I'm
up with a
sorry.
rubric that we use for future self-evaluations. Just a thought.
Alex, what do you think?
I want to go ahead and use this and, you know, not necessarily, I think the comments part would be most useful, not the always, sometimes, rarely, never.
Yeah.
Because it depends on the issue, but any feedback that we could share with one another, as long as we're not, you know, unlike what Martin said the feedback was last time, you know, diplomatic enough, but forthright enough.
Well, so maybe we should give this a shot first and then try something else.
And
Do
you're-
do you know why David chose this particular one?
I think it was out of VSBA
Okay.
largely.
So I think the buckets are really around policy governance, so what your
Yeah.
role is, so just knowing where, and I like the idea that you're talking about using the big things that you're working on, like master planning and visioning and the budget presentations and your community linkages, and, you know, metrics, you guys are always asking for metrics, it's nice to have metrics to see what it looks like, so.
I do think there would need to be some revisions in here, because this one seems a little bit, I'm not, or maybe some clarification about what some of the things mean. So, I'm not sure what it means that my fellow board members participate as assigned in the board's ownership linkage plan. I have no idea what that means. And I think there are a few things scattered throughout as I read through it, where I thought, this is so jargony that I don't understand.
And
For
I
me,
know
I
where
would-
this came, this is deeply rooted in policy governance.
Right,
so-
and that's what I'm saying, that we use modified policy governance here, and this needs to be reflective of that, to make sure that we feel like we're performing the role we're expecting to perform. That whole modified policy governance in itself is confusing, and always has been for me. Like, if you're using modified policy governance, exactly what's modified and where we're expected to do more than
Deviate or
policy, or
not, yeah.
deviate from policy governance. The other thing is, I would like to see, if possible, a focus on what we think can be done to remedy some of the stuff. So it's one thing to just kind of assess it, but, you know, ideas for, you know, what kind of professional development there might be. You know, for example, you know, the thing on here about, you know, running an effective public hearing was something that came out of the whole, I believe that came out of some past issues that some specific, you know, processes that we've had where we, you know, maybe were criticized by the public for not running an effective public hearing, or thought we could do better, or knew that we had things coming up where we're going to need to have public hearings, and so want to be prepared for that. But then we've not really talked about, you know, so how do we then move forward with that?
Right.
Like, how do we actually get that professional development under our belt and use that?
Is there any feeling that, and I don't want to get tied up in the jargon per se, but is there any sentiment that maybe we should sort of rebase a little bit of a re-education on policy governance? So if this language is still appropriate, at least we've had a refresher in that, because that is our chosen form of governance.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I mean, it just so happens that a couple things that take up most of our time, master planning and visioning, doesn't fit in policy governance really, or negotiations doesn't fit. I mean, those are things that we've taken on and we're not delegating And we're delegating parts of it, but.
And
are
that's the tricky
closely
bit.
involved.
How much are we delegating and where are those lines? I mean, that is really confusing because it sort of feels like it's on sometimes an almost day-by-day basis with regard to master planning, for example. You know, like how much is supposed to be us physically doing the work, how much of it's supposed to be delegated, and where those lines are. I just think it would be helpful for communication and our work to understand, you know, what's expected of us and what's expected of administration and all that.
Well,
Yeah.
might that be a good starting point to look at some period of time for re-education on policy governance, and then there can be the discussion of that?
Yeah, and I would advocate for that being South Burlington specific, as opposed to just shipping folks off to Montpelier for a refresher on policy governance, because in my opinion, where we're struggling, if we're struggling, I mean, the places I've had the most challenges personally as a board member are where those lines are around the edges of modified policy governance versus actual policy governance. Because I went to Montpelier in my second or third, and maybe both second and third years to sort of have a refresher course on policy governance. And it's very rote and it's very specific about, you know, in this scenario, are you adhering to policy governance or not? You know, and what's the right thing to do in this situation? And I looked at those, I'm like, that's interesting, because that's not exactly how we're doing it in South Burlington, you know, and I feel like we need all of us in the room to sort of have the different interpretations of it and come to an understanding about what we're doing, because it's hard when you're sort of in Montpelier, just surrounded by other districts that do policy governance slightly differently, or are new folks learning about policy governance for the first time. It sometimes doesn't get your questions answered, really.
Right.
So, I'm just listening to that and maybe thinking it might be helpful if we did something specific to South Burlington, if we did a little bit of a download of those areas that we would be looking at assessing the board ourselves, and present those to the trainer on policy governance and say, look, here's the real work that's going on within our city or within our school district, and we want to have a discussion about this specific work within the context of policy, of educating ourselves or re-educating on policy governance.
Yeah, and I think I know this is supposed to be about board self-assessment, but I think it would be really helpful to hear from administration with regard to this policy governance thing. Understand it's uncomfortable maybe for David to like criticize us, but it would be helpful to understand where he feels we're overstepping or not supporting him enough, or you know where he would like those lines to be, and have a real open discussion about that. Because I've brought it up a couple times, particularly with regard to the specialization discussion. You know, like what is our role in that situation, and how do we perform a policy governance role if, for example, we don't know what the ends metrics are, and we have no way of assessing whether the policies are actually doing what we're hoping they're doing. It's really hard for us to step back. You know, when we have those metrics in place and we can assess, are the policies working or not working, it's easier to step back and sort of stay in our lane. But if we don't, then there are questions constantly. So it would be helpful to hear from him, and also to have a real frank discussion about that.
So some examples I've heard that could help frame this are master planning and visioning, negotiations, specialization. I might put stormwater specifically, or what?
Or like city-school collaboration,
Yeah.
because that is something that is a little bit outside of policy governance, and we're expected as board members to really interact with that.
Are there other topics we'd want to share, some background info before we set up that?
Well, I think that specialization is a good example as well. And that one's, our lanes are more clear, or should
Yeah.
be more clear.
Yeah. And I stepped right
Although-
outside mine.
Well, no, although what
Yeah.
you said, as far as not having the metrics in place, makes it a little bit more difficult, absolutely.
Yeah,
But that's kind of a classic one where it should work.
right.
Other topics? How about from Gary or Joanne?
You know, we were working with Val Gardner at our central office team. I don't know if David talked with you
Yeah.
about that, but she's, policy governance guru.
Then, yeah, Maybe
And-
it's a person we should bring in.
Yeah, and she's really, I mean, because we're trying to get ourselves to try and figure out what we're supposed to be doing and how we can have the right metrics for you guys and have everything and keep the reports succinct and not have a lot of different reports, so that we're really giving you the information that you need so that you can do the work you need to do as a policy governance board. So we've been doing some work with her, and she might be someone who could work with the board. And I like the idea of thinking about the issues that have tripped us up and on both sides, and how can we implement policy governance with fidelity so that you're able to do your job as a board and we're able to do our work as administrators and under David's leadership to get the things done so that we're meeting our ends. So I think it'd be great. So I'll bring that back to David. I don't know if there's other issues, Gary, that we would put on there. I don't think so.
No, I mean, I concur that both a refresher from Val on both board responsibilities and administrative responsibilities under policy governance could frame
Might be helpful.
the basis of a real self-assessment for you in both how you're administering the modified policy governance, what changes you'd like to make, and like Joanne said, if you're getting what you need from the administration to make the decisions you need to make.
Yeah.
Well, and if MPV is such a big issue, perhaps we could take some sub-part of it, like the academic gains that are to come out of what we're doing. That's going to be a big part of what we're talking about over the next 6 months, and I'd like to be able to talk about it more clearly.
Very closely related to the ends.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, not just academics, all the other ends as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah.
So those sound like good parameters to start with, and I'll also circle up around. And David did mention Val as a
Yeah.
potential resource, so.
Yeah.
And like you said, Gary, I think it could inform the self-assessment
Yeah.
and maybe help us
It could.
streamline this tool a little bit, maybe modify it appropriately.
Or at least tell us what the ownership linkage plan is.
Yeah.
Secret decoder. Okay,
I mean, I can clarify that a little bit. The owners are the community.
community, yeah.
It's the linkage between the governing body and the community that's referencing.
Yeah, this whole first
And we-
section
and
of
we
the
could take that
top section of
broader-
the calendar.
We, along with these specific projects, we could take that broader concept of community engagement, because that is always a challenge. And, speak to that, so I'll add that to the list. All right,
Great.
good discussion. Other paper articles.
I think I'm up next, and have one due, I believe, next Thursday, so not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. So I just need to get something drafted and sent around.
Okay.
I have a question on I'm the month following Bridget. The topic is funding mechanism. We're talking about Act 68.
I think we're talking
No,
about
probably-
funding mechanism for master planning
Yeah,
vision.
bond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, my question about that one is whether we'll
We'll
be ready,
Mm,
because
good
we won't
one.
even have the financial advisor on board fully at that
Yeah.
stage. And that's why I think, I was looking at that and thinking that we probably need a different topic for that.
Or can we move educational impact up?
I think that one will be a lot more fleshed out because, yeah, I think there'll be a lot more to say on that, because there was all the educational impact that we assessed in sort of the visioning process and understanding what we were hoping for, and then we're getting deeper into that really on a day-by-day basis with additional faculty who weren't involved in the early part of the process coming in and sort of adding richness to that. So, yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. Actually, there's probably so much good stuff that it would be hard to consolidate into a 500-word article, but it would be a good, I think that would be a good one.
How's that all being memorialized?
It's notes right now from meetings and that kind of thing. Yeah, that's, yeah.
So you asked today to have them formally captured.
Yes, and so they'll need to be shared on the website and all
Right,
that.
yeah.
There's not really a formal report coming so much on, here is educational impact. It's more, this is what we're expecting from this project.
Should there be something more formal, more of a formal report on that? Because, I mean, this is gonna be a huge part of what the community's gonna wanna know. I'm just wondering.
I mean, it would be memorialized as each stage in the process through the last report was memorialized. There'll be documents, sort of like, here are the meeting minutes, and here is, the conversation, and we could ask for, I was assuming that we would probably internally be doing the summary of that, like getting that data dump and doing the summary of it. Yeah. The question is whether, under our current contract with Dora Whittier, there's another report coming, and my understanding is no. I mean, they're working on all the moving pieces of sort of getting us ready for a vote. And yeah, I don't think that there was ever a plan for another formal report coming out after this.
My interpretation, Bridget, if I could, from today, is what you asked for today would certainly inform the board of individual impacts, projected improvements, and the educational outcome impact that come from those.
Yeah.
I think that would inform an article and inform the board on the educational impacts from this phase.
If we can't fit it in the 500-word article, if we need to have something more robust online, we probably should.
No, and we did talk about that today. Yeah, Gary's reminded me what the exact discussion was, is that there was a sort of a table or, some sort of visual, here are the current challenges educationally that we're facing, and, well, both educationally and operationally, really. And then here are the proposed solutions to that in this design, and here's what the expected outcome and improvement would be from those solutions. So that's how we're talking about capturing all of this and organizing it.
Right.
And I think the intent would be for that to be online and to be used as the basis of discussions and things going forward. Yeah.
I could, as we're talking about this, I could envision, if I'm thinking about sort of the higher level presentation that would be, broadly distributed as we're trying to educate people prior to a vote.
Mm-hmm.
I would have an expectation, of sections of that, and I know we're bringing somebody on for communications, but certainly the finances are one side of it.
Of course, yeah.
But I have envisioned educational impact being a section of that summary to the community. And is that what that information, it could be summarized to populate that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, also when we were having the specialization or MTSS discussion, I had hoped that, I don't know who it is, Mike Martin or somebody could have given us more sort of scientific papers or academic papers on the outcomes. And I know it's early days and that was sort of hard to come by, but maybe that's more possible this time around. I think I understand with conversations from people like Pat Burke why it's important to have passive supervision, why it's important to have natural sunlight, why it's important to have places where students can get together and do their work without being interfered with. But is there anything that we could put up that speaks to that would help us to say, here's what it does? I understand why that seems like a good idea, but I don't know if it's quantifiable, but something a little
Right.
more.
So I mean, this kind of, I hark back to when we were, the first phase in master plan envisioning and trying to figure out the educational benefits of having a single consolidated elementary school versus the other options. And, one place to look is certainly academic articles and that kind of expertise, and there wasn't much there. And I don't know that there's going to be a ton there to help now, because frankly, the one article I've seen so far that Dorn Whitaker has pointed to was was elementary school. There was all sorts of factors that made it distinguishable from the situation I think we have. But we don't have to just have that if and this goes to policy governance as well, if we have our experts who we hired to educate the community's kids can give us the rationale, we can rely on that expertise as long as it makes sense and it's reasonable and it's explained. And it sounds like that's more of what's being developed through this.
Mm-hmm.
To the extent there are any academic articles or studies that will support it, great. But I doubt that we're gonna be able to rely on that. We're gonna really have to show that the smart people we've hired to run our schools say that these are the problems, this is the solution, and this is gonna be the likely outcome. I mean, I
And then
think,
our end reports, and will be the research after that, once it gets
Right.
built.
right, there we go, yes. And
Well, I
then-
suppose that's the goal of the RETN video that Doran Whittier is talking about.
Well,
And that's more like,
That's
that's
what
more
is-
sort of like what the current conditions
Yeah.
are. But I mean, yeah. No, there's just, I mean, there's just a lot of good stuff coming out of these meetings about, here's where we're making do. And here's what we could do if we didn't just have to make do.
Yeah,
Like
right
here,
on.
So for example, I mean, one of the examples is what Pat's already talked about in several community meetings, which is a transformation of how wellness and health and physical education are done. And it won't just be, you take a class for a couple, a certain number of semesters to get a credit and that's your physical education. It's more of an actual, teaching people how to take their own wellness, seriously and how to build a plan for themselves and to find something that's gonna sort of carry them through adulthood and get them ready to go out on their own without someone telling you have to show up for gym class at, a certain time. So that's one example that comes to mind, but there are certainly others and, folks like Cole and other people have been there saying, this is what my lived experience in the building is, and if this design that you're talking about really works the way you say it's going to work, this is how it would change what we're doing for the better.
some life, we have to crystallize that into 500
Yeah.
words.
So no problem, right, Alex? Next month you'll be ready to.
Well, I was gonna do that one.
Oh, you were doing that
Martin's
one.
doing it.
Martin's doing it. Okay.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
we're switching these two?
Switching the
switch those
dates,
two, yep.
just switching
Okay.
the dates.
Okay.
And any thoughts beyond, so now we're into the March publication, beyond these
That's too
items.
far ahead in future to think about.
So we have, you're happy with 4 in the queue?
I think so. No telling what will happen between now and March.
All right, unless there's anything else, we'll move on to setting the agenda for the October 2nd meeting.
At that point, hopefully, the junior school board rep would be here.
Mhm.
So the junior school board class representative would
All
be
right.
just an introduction, but we probably
Great.
wouldn't need it. Of course, that depends on interviews and that kind of thing.
Okay. We'll try to make sure we accommodate that. That's the expectation you spoke to candidates about?
Yeah, I hadn't completely outlined it in case we had to deviate away from that.
Yeah.
So I said the applications were due Monday of this week, and then I was hoping that would give us this week to look over them
Mhm.
and set interview dates.
Like next
And
week.
then next week for interviews. And
Great.
then hopefully that would give us enough time for October.
Perfect. All right. We'll need to add enrollment back on the superintendent's
Yes.
report.
Mhm.
We will need, we've got the evaluation up there. Anything else?
2.4 is on there.
Yeah, these would change based on our new calendar.
Oh, would these change?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just ask
These 2,
David to
4.
review those then.
Yeah. They would be 2-4 and 2-5.
Okay. All right, anything else?
So, and I'm probably not at, in fact, I know I'm not at this next meeting,
Okay.
although I may try to arrange it so I can join by phone, but I'm not sure yet if I'll be able to.
Have you got notes on that then?
So
we'll
we're gonna do, we're gonna
take
take
this
off,
off.
yeah, we'll take off executive limitations,
Mhm.
policy review, and we'll have financial conditions and activities,
2-4 and 2-5.
2-4, and then 2-5,
Mhm.
financial planning and budgeting.
Okay, and then you can just take off this and do introduction, or even just,
I don't think that
No,
financial planning and budgeting is.
that's not gonna, so that's not gonna happen.
It's not gonna happen in the next board meeting.
So though this calendar,
This is the first I'm hearing of any change.
okay.
Wait a minute. We just approved this calendar.
Do we have to
We're deviating off.
amend the calendar?
Well, maybe it's an adjustment to the second meeting in October.
We'll leave it up to David to
Okay.
make that modification on policy then. Okay. All right. We'll have, okay, we've got master planning and vision. Is there any specific discussion on master planning and visioning?
It's really gonna just be an update, the yeah, so it would be the second meeting in October where there would be, discussion about financial advisor and other consultants. So this, not for this one, that would just,
It will be the second meeting in October, you'll
okay,
approve or disapprove a recommendation for a financial advisor.
yeah. So I think next time is just gonna be a general update on what's happened so far at community input sessions and all of that. Yeah, I don't think
So
that there's
this is
any
the second
specific
meeting.
thing that's gonna be at those meetings.
This is the first meeting in October, and that's the second
Yeah.
meeting? Okay,
Yeah.
so that's why.
Okay. We've had some discussion on future agenda items already. I do like that there's been an effort made to assign those to a specific policy monitoring report. I would suggest, Joanne, the recommendation on global executive constraint for both the first and third bullet points. And then maybe the financial plan on the city school long-term investment. And you had a potential recommendation on the last one.
Global ends.
Okay. So at least maybe review that with David and see if those can be assigned.
Okay.
All right, consider the minutes of the September 4th meeting.
Oh, just a second.
Oh, sorry.
On
Go
this
ahead.
future agenda, or the agenda for next time, it raised, as I was looking at, consider the minutes of the meeting of September 16, 18, and 24. We would also have the 25th, which is a community input session. I just want to make sure that that's warned, that somebody is on top of warning that meeting. Okay,
I'm pretty sure David is
Okay.
on top of that.
Okay.
okay. But that should be added as, we'll have minutes from that meeting. There'll be basic minutes of, opening and closing the meeting or whatever, but that should be added to this agenda for October 2nd.
So let's just make sure, just the 25th?
So the 16th, the 18th, you're on number 16 now?
Yes, so the 16th and the 24th would both be negotiations planning meetings, right? Those would be the ones that we warn for Monday mornings. Is that why they're on there? And then the 18th would be this meeting. And then the 25th would happen before October 2nd. So we would,
September 25th needs to be added there.
yes, that's all I'm saying.
So we've got 4 dates we're
Yep,
putting
got
in.
it.
Okay.
Yes.
All right, the September 4th minutes. Looks like that was a working, nope.
that was
Nope,
our-
that was a full meeting, yep. Any modifications?
I think it's fine.
All right, seeing none, those are accepted. And on a consent agenda, we have 2 items, a new hire and a bid. Do you want to review the bid, Gary?
Sure, so this is for the voice-over IP phone system to replace our antiquated existing phone system. We ended up having 2 finalists, Carousel and Twin State. Ronco did not meet our specifications. It was a fairly clear differential, similar capabilities. We recommended awarding to Carousel for our new on-premise voice-over IP. Total for 5 years is $226,999.71. This system also qualifies for an E911 grant of $25,000 per school, which it's installed. And it qualifies, because of its capability, it'll save $675 a month for 5 years, because we can remove the point-to-point T1 service at each elementary school. So, pretty happy. It was a long process, basically because of the complexities of the E911 grant, but we're pretty happy with the outcome.
And is the 5-year number in budget?
It is.
For you? Okay. I'm more curious about this, but when we send a specification out and we get a vendor who responds, when they don't meet specification, I don't really understand that process. If you sent the spec out, what do you?
So it was the evaluating group's determination that they didn't meet the specifications that fulfill.
Go through the Kenseth?
What's that?
Through this Kenseth Communications?
I'm still didn't hear
The
that.
consultant,
That Marion? Was it?
Yes, through, well, we had a whole working group that
Okay.
evaluated each proposal. We had probably 10 meetings to review it all.
Okay. By way of example, just for clarity, and part of this comes from the fact that we have difficulty getting vendors, in my history, getting a number of vendors to select from, was service being in the area of specification.
It was not. That was a consideration.
Okay.
But the paging interface piece
Mm-hmm.
and the server specifications,
Were specifications, okay. All right, thanks. All right, any other questions on the consent agenda? Seeing nothing else, those are approved by consensus. AP orders 10 and 11, any questions? All right, I'll take a motion to adjourn and we go back into executive session, resume executive session.
Second?
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you, we're adjourned.